Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Bruce Springsteen Archives and Center for American Music's free, virtual, and very informal monthly series called Conversations with Our Curator. I am Melissa Ziobro, the Director of Curatorial Affairs for the Bruce Springsteen Archives and Center for American Music here at Monmouth University, just a mile from the beach in beautiful West Long Branch, New Jersey. Tonight, we are chatting with John Morrison about his new book, Boyz II Men 40th Anniversary Celebration, Unofficial and Unauthorized. So, really looking forward to this one. But before we dive into chatting with John, as always, just a few housekeeping details. If you're not super familiar with the Bruce Springsteen Archives and Center for American Music, we are Bruce's official repository. Yes, that is true, but we also celebrate the history of American music in all its diversity of artists and genres with our exhibits, our programming, our publications, and more. As a public historian, I get very excited talking about how music is such an accessible prism through which we can approach and understand our shared past. So, we at the Springsteen Center are currently in the midst of building a brand new, roughly 30,000 square foot center, our new home, scheduled to open on the campus of Monmouth University in late spring of 2026. It'll feature a roughly 250 seat theater, exhibits, the archive for research, and so much more. You can keep track of our progress on our social media and on our website, which is springsteenarchives.org. You can also donate on our website if you are so inclined, because we are a 501c3 and every dollar counts. So thank you for letting me introduce ourselves a little bit, as we always have some new names on our registration list for these programs, because we do have such diverse topics that we cover, from Fleetwood Mac to the Beatles to Bruce Springsteen to now Boyz II Men. This particular program, Conversations with Our Curator, is a free monthly web series that features researchers and writers exploring new perspectives in American music history. I really wanted us to have some programming that was accessible to folks wherever they were, whether or not they could come visit us at the shore or not. So, after some initial questions from me, we will open the floor to audience Q&A. So as you're listening to John and I chat, be jotting down your own questions for him, because you'll certainly have an opportunity to ask them at the end. And I do keep these events to no more than 1 hour. If you like what you hear tonight and you want to share this book, this program, the recording will be posted to our website, which again is springsteenarchives.org. I also just posted on our website the books for the first half of 2026. So you want to go check those out and save the dates well in advance. All right, so that's the end of my public service announcements. Let's get to John, the exciting content for tonight. John, I'm going to give you the easiest softball question to start. Just tell us a little bit about you and your background.
Yeah. I'm a music journalist. I've worked as a music journalist since I think the first piece I had published was way back in the 1990s. I was writing about Philly's local music scene and interviewing bands as a junior in high school. And, since then I've just plugged away at this craft of writing about music, specifically writing a lot about black music and in a historical context. But I'm also a DJ, so my practice as a music journalist, a researcher, and a DJ, they all go hand in hand and play nicely together. So yeah, that's kind of my deal. I'm a writer, a researcher, and I play music for people for fun. You know what I mean? So it's all interconnected.
I have to take issue with one thing you just said, John. You referred to the 90s as way back in the 90s, and I find that personally very distressing. The 90s were only a couple of years ago, John. But anyway,
So
um,
long ago.
I also want to note you just referenced DJing. John has this wonderful program, an interactive program on the history of hip hop sampling that we brought to Monmouth University earlier this year. Definitely recommend that for anyone who is listening and may have an opportunity for John to bring that to you. So just putting that out there is a
Yeah, very,
wonderful
very
interactive
fun.
program. So, John, what inspired you to take on this 40th anniversary retrospective of Boys to Men, especially as an unofficial and unauthorized project?
Yeah, so a lot of my research and writing is about Philly music history.
Mhm.
Like I've written about the history of like psychedelic rock in Philly. Early hip hop history is a heavy focus of mine. Hip hop history in Philadelphia. You know, jazz in Philly. I'm like always wrestling with Philly music. And Boyz II Men may be the biggest pop group to ever come out of the city of Philadelphia. So I knew at some point I was going to have to write something significant about their work and legacy. But the idea to do this book actually came from my editor, a brilliant native Philadelphian named Kara Donaldson, my editor at Quarto Books. She was a reader of my work and was familiar with the kind of stuff that I like to focus on. And she just reached out to me and pitched the idea to me. She was like, yo, would you write a comprehensive book about Boyz II Men? So we started talking about it. We're like having conversations about Boyz II Men, but also the vocal tradition of like black male R&B groups in
Mhm.
particular. You know, Philly soul, doo wop, all of this other stuff. We're like talking about Boyz II Men, but then talking about a lot of other stuff, and that I don't want to say convinced me. I don't think I needed convincing, but that uh, those series of conversations with Kara uh, kind of opened up the possibilities of what this book could be. And, you know, as a researcher and a journalist, my instinct is to go to primary sources.
Mhm.
So I immediately started thinking about people that I knew who knew Boyz II Men who I could, you know, contact to get interviews. But the publisher didn't want me to uh, use like the band as a primary source.
Mm.
But then also, as we were talking about it, you know, and I'm thinking about what kind of book I wanted to write about Boyz II Men. I more so wanted this to be a work of journalism. I didn't want it to be, you know, a collaborative biography
Yeah.
kind of thing. I may end up writing something like that in the future. I don't know. Um, but I didn't want this to be, you know, a situation where certain stories I couldn't include or,
Yeah.
you know, certain perspectives, you know, that would come in with a collaborative project. So the publisher and I just talked about it a lot, and it was like, okay, this is going to be a book where we kind of talk around the group
Yeah.
while talking about the group.
I think that's so interesting, right? Because look at us, for example, we're Bruce's official repository. Well, that comes with a level of access, but then certain constraints as well,
A
right?
thousand percent,
So
yeah.
you didn't have unfettered access to the band, but would you say in some ways it allowed you more freedoms than you might have had if, say, they commissioned you to write this?
For sure. And I don't think that there's anything in this book, certainly nothing that's like mean spirited or like
Yeah.
a gotcha kind of thing. Like I'm trying to approach this as you know, with some kind of like analytical distance, but it's still my perspective and knowledge and all of that stuff. But it's I don't think that there's anything in the book that the band would object to,
Yeah.
but it's a work of journalism, so you know, to kind of put it harshly, it doesn't matter if they would object
Yeah.
to like, oh, we wouldn't include that story. Well, it's true and it happened, so it's in the book
Yeah. You had a degree of professional remove here that allowed you to write a very unique piece.
for sure.
So you kind of touched on this earlier that you were excited at the idea of situating Boys to Men within this broader context of Philly music history. So Boys to Men, their harmonies are rooted in Philly gospel, doo-wop. Like, what musical lineages do you think were most influential on the group in their early years, and why?
Yeah, I think that gospel, certainly doo-wop, um, and then this whole history of Philly R&B in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. That stuff is absolutely the group's foundation. And probably if you wanted to look at it in that way, that would probably be most influential. That was the music that got these guys singing and got them started. And they really came out of a culture of R&B music that exists in Philadelphia, and a culture of singing. But I don't look at it like as like a hierarchy.
Mm.
I don't look at it like, oh, this is the most influential and this
Yeah.
is lesser influences. I think that they used R&B and gospel as a foundation, like those vocal traditions, and certainly doo-wop. But then, I write about this in the book. The group, they met the at Kappa, the Philadelphia High School for the Creative and Performing Arts, and they sung a lot of European classical music, like choral music. You know what I
Mm.
mean? Like that was part of their training.
Yeah.
But then also you see as they go on in their career, they're covering like Billy Joel songs. They're bringing in like different influences. So they're definitely a group that is rooted in this great tradition of gospel and R&B and doo wop. But throughout the years, they've incorporated a lot of different things, and it feels like um, a constellation of influences. I don't look at it
Mm.
as like a top to bottom kind of thing where here's the big influences and then they have the little influences. They all play together in the music that Boyz II Men makes.
This is something that comes up in a lot of my conversations with, music history scholars and the artists themselves. Sometimes the general public is more concerned with putting people in boxes, right? And than the artists themselves are, because they just
Yeah,
want to draw on what inspires them, what feels good, what works for them.
for sure. And musicians, uh, I think, generally have a different relationship to genre than consumers do, than
Hmm.
music fans do. A music fan walks into a record store and, if they're in the jazz, they'll hang out in the jazz section. If they love punk, they'll hang out in the punk section. And, you have a lot of people who have big ears and like eclectic tastes, and they'll, you know, uh, cross paths that way and uh, go through different genres. But musicians generally, I don't think are segregating genre
Yeah.
in that way. They're pulling in influences, kind of like a blender, and making the juice that way out of multiple elements. I don't think it's as strictly regimented as a consumer would think about genre.
Yeah. So as Boys to Men, they draw on these really diverse influences. What makes the sound that they ultimately come up with unique to them?
Yeah, I think that when you look at the landscape of R&B when Boys to Men came out in the early '90s, you absolutely had kind of like a mini renaissance of uh, black hip hop influenced vocal groups, right? So they had a lot of peers who were kind of swimming in the same waters, but I think that primarily the influence of doo-wop and jazz singing in particular set them apart from a lot of groups. You had groups like Jodeci, who's a group that Boyz II Men are often contrasted with, like with their image and sound and all of that. Jodeci are deeply rooted in gospel singing. Like their harmonies sound like a gospel quartet, but it's just in an R&B context. Boyz II Men could do that as well, but there was something about the way, and I talk a little bit about this in the book. There's something about the way that they layered their harmonies that's much more jazz influenced, much more doo-wop influenced than a lot of their peers who were at the time. So I think that that coupled with the fact that they had these big monster hit songs that just went all over the world, that separated them from the rest of their peers.
You just mentioned these monster hit songs. For folks who might be listening to this who are not necessarily overly familiar with Boyz II Men, talk to us about the level of success that they achieve.
Yeah, it was crazy, and I lived through this period. Like I was a teenager in the '90s, so I remember these songs and their impact. I have vivid memories of hearing Boyz II Men everywhere. But researching and writing this book really uh, just reinforced my understanding of just how big that they were as a group. You think about songs like "End of the Road," "I'll Make Love to You," "One Sweet Day" with Mariah Carey. These were record-breaking singles. Like broke Elvis's record, with "End of the Road," and then broke then "I'll Make Love to You" broke "End of the Road's" record. You know what I mean? Like it's just these massive, massive hits, and I think that we think about the '90s and pop culture, and of course we think about hip hop. We think about a group like Nirvana that was like huge when I was a kid during this period, but Boyz II Men in a lot of ways are also one of the defining groups of that era. I don't think that they get credit for that. They got all the commercial success, but I don't think that they really get credit for making these songs that are like that. You would identify the '90s with this music.
Why don't they get the credit?
I think I talk about this in the book too. I think that R&B has been marginalized critically, critically and academically. When we think about uh, the great like canon of popular music that critics, you know, uh, like to talk about and like to celebrate, R&B is very rarely included in that canon. Obviously, Stevie Wonder, maybe like Curtis Mayfield, folks from the '70s, but R&B from the '80s and '90s, even the '60s, uh, doesn't really get the same kind of critical props as rock music from the '60s and '70s, that kind of thing. If you make a list of the greatest albums of all time and you ask, especially critics who are like rock critics, pop critics, a lot of times you might get one or two R&B records. So I think that Boyz II Men, because of the kind of music that they made and because of um, the class and racial dynamics that uh, shape how records are received critically, I think that that's one of the reasons why Boyz II Men don't really get the credit for how influential they were and how impactful this music was.
No, not only did they have enormous hits in their own right, they collaborate with some of the biggest artists of the day, right? So Mariah Carey, Babyface. Can you talk about their collaborations a little bit?
Yeah, Babyface is one of the greatest songwriters that this country has ever produced. He's right up there with Stevie Wonder, Bob Dylan, Smokey Robinson. Like Babyface is a brilliant, brilliant composer, and I think that uh, him collaborating with Boyz II Men was really a key incident. They uh, made End of the Road when they were on break from tour. Boyz II Men was touring. They went to Atlanta and met with Babyface, and then I think they went back up to Philly at Studio 4 and recorded End of the Road, and it became the biggest record that year. And a bunch of little things had to happen. This person had to meet that person, and Babyface had to, or the group had to be able to meet with Babyface from tour. A bunch of stuff had to happen in order for that record to happen, but it really took Boyz II Men to a whole other level. You know what I mean? That song was so big that the label had to reissue their first album with that song on it. You know what I mean? So that relationship with Babyface, I think, was key. Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis, of course, were legends even at that point in their career. So it's Boyz II Men for being a group that had such a identifiable like sound that was personal to them as a group. A lot of what made them successful were these collaborations, and then they made some of the biggest records with Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis and Babyface, and then they came back. It was a comeback, but the on the back end of that run of these big hit records, then they did One Sweet Day with Mariah Carey, which was huge, and I don't even think they thought that record was going to be as big as it was and reign, on the charts as long as it did. But it's a testament to the fact that Boyz II Men was a strong, very distinct group with a distinct vocal style, but being open to collaboration, I think helped them out a lot. They did a record with LL Cool J called Hey Lover, which was not a big pop hit like End of the Road or I'll Make Love to You, but it was big in the streets. It was big, in hip hop culture, and kind of lent some I don't want to say street cred, but like lent like a little authenticity to Boyz II Men in the hip hop space, that they could do that record with LL. So there's a lot of collaborative energy throughout their catalog that I think took them from whatever level they would have been at and put them over the top.
Mm. You just mentioned this idea of them kind of wading into hip hop culture or getting a little street cred, because they were often described as like kind of a clean or wholesome group,
Yeah,
right? Did that box them in culturally in any ways? Did it help them? Did it hurt them?
I think that it definitely helped them.
Okay.
The history of Black American pop music, uh, and how musicians have navigated crossing over, and this idea of crossing over and pop music and all of that. It's tied into a lot of other racial dynamics that accompany a group like Boyz II Men onto stage. It's not just they come on the stage and oh, this is good music. You know what I mean? And white audiences, don't just historically don't just look at black artists, as just musicians. All of these other racial and social dynamics and stereotypes influence how white audiences in particular, but also black audiences, how we perceive these musicians. So I think that Boyz II Men having this kind of reputation for being like clean, family friendly,
Mm.
wholesome, that sort of thing, I think that it helped put them over the top. and it's not something that they rebelled against as young black men. They
Mm.
actually leaned into it. You know what I mean, with their fashion choices, even the choices of like songs that they would do, like they famously covered like the Beatles yesterday. You know what I mean? Like they loved like doing that live. So they weren't rejecting that kind of clean cut, family friendly, crossover ready image. They really leaned into it. I haven't. I've read like a ton of Boys to Men interviews writing this book, and I haven't come across any instances of them feeling like constrained
Mm.
by this. From everything that I can tell, they leaned into it and they were like, okay, if this is how young black men are perceived, we're gonna do something different in the interest of crossing over and courting a wider audience.
And would you say that at the height of their success, they were equally popular with black and white audiences?
So there's no, I don't think that just because of like the demographic makeup of this country, I don't
Mm.
think anybody's ever equally popular between black and white audiences. I think that once you become so big, then the white majority in this country, they're going to be the majority people who are coming to your concerts
Mm.
and buying records. But there's a live review that I quote in the book. I can't think of the journalist or the city that they were in. I've kind of been out of Boyz II Men world since this book came out, but the journalist remarked in the live review that they were playing an arena show and the majority of people who were there were white. You know what I
Mm.
mean? So maybe when Motownphilly came out, like when their first single, because that was more hip hop oriented, younger leaning sound. Maybe they had a majority black audience then, but after like I'll Make Love to You, End of the Road, One Sweet Day, these big, massive pop crossover hits, the majority of their audience was white.
Let's go behind the scenes a little bit. We know that it can be hard for bands, for groups to stick together, to get along. Um, how is their group dynamic?
It's interesting because they talk a lot in interviews about the music more so than the business
Mm.
of being in this kind of group, and they talk a lot about uh, the way the way that they describe it is kind of like magic, the magic of harmonizing
Mm.
together, which I talk about it in the book, but there's something deeply human about singing together and kind of blending voices together. It's a very physical but also very intimate thing, and they talk about that process of like being uh, in tune and harmonizing together with kind of I don't want to say kind of, absolutely they talk about it with reverence, you know. So there's certain parts of the book where I talk about the ebbs and flows of the group's career, them being like one of the biggest pop groups in the world, and then not so much being what not being popular anymore, and that sort of thing. But throughout all of it, even in the interviews and the low times, they talk about this magical character of that they can reach together by singing together and harmonizing together. So that's the biggest takeaway uh, from the book for me. Writing it and researching it, it's like, yo, these dudes really love singing together. Like it's
Mm.
not just you know oh, we sing happy birthday together at a party and it's nice. Like, no, they talk about it like really a magical spiritual
Mm.
experience harmonize it together. It's beautiful to see, and it's not surprising to me that even though they went from four members to three, that they still love doing it together. Like
Mm.
you could tell it's a business, it's a job, but the way they talk about the musical aspect of it, it's more than that.
Is it like the harmonizing reduces competition in a way because everybody brings that unique and special piece that ultimately creates the whole?
Yeah, it's definitely with this particular style of singing uh, coming out of the doo-wop tradition in particular, where everybody has their role that they play. Every singer is an instrument, in their own right. It is kind of like an egalitarian thing, experience. They're all singing together. Maybe one person takes a solo and they step back, and somebody else takes a solo. It is a democratic kind of approach to music making.
A little bit on the history of the group. You just referenced this. Tell us a little bit about this shift from quartet to trio.
Yeah, so a few folks have asked me about this. Like, oh, did you talk about why the one guy left? And I'm like, yeah, absolutely. Like I break down the whole story of why Michael McCary left the group. So what happened was Michael had a lot of health issues. Like he had issue with his back. You know, he started to find it difficult to stand on stage and
Mhm.
perform. And this is a group that's, you know, in the old school R&B mold where you stand on stage, you do choreography, you dance. Like it's, they're up there for an hour, 2 hours doing choreography and all of this stuff. So Michael started to struggle physically, and he started missing shows. Like he's like, yo, I can't do this. My body isn't holding up. So he says that, and I tell the story from two different perspectives. Michael says that because he had physical limitations, they kicked him out of the group.
Mhm.
Sean, I think it's Sean in particular. He's like the most vocal about stuff like this. Sean told the story that they were accommodating to Michael and his physical limitations and did not want him to leave the group, but he kept missing shows, and at one
Mhm.
point he got word from a mutual friend that the three, Sean, Wanye, and Nate, were going to Europe to do a tour. So Michael, this is what Sean says. Michael kind of came back like, "Hey, so when we going to Europe, when we going to Asia to do this tour and get this money?" And they're like, "Nah, dude, you missed a bunch of shows. The three of us are going to Asia. You're not going."
Mhm.
So they got into a physical fight. I believe at Wanye's house, because at one point they were all living like close to each other. I believe they all met at Wanye's house, but maybe it was Nate's house, and they got into a physical fight over this, and that's what led to Michael being kicked out of the group, according to Sean.
Mhm.
So I don't take a stance on this because literally I don't know. I wasn't there. So in the book, I lay out Michael's version
Yeah.
and Sean and the three remaining members, their version.
Do you know if they speak today?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
So, and this happened while I was kind of in the home stretch of writing the book. They actually reconciled, and you know, now Michael will occasionally join them on stage.
Mm.
So he'll like pop out to certain gigs, and he'll be on stage. Maybe he'll sing. Maybe he'll just take a bow with the rest of the guys. So they seem to be uh, playing nicely now,
Okay.
and kind of reconciling now. And I didn't know because when I started writing this book, they hadn't talked for years,
Mm.
and literally when I got towards like the end of working on it, they started to kind of pop up in public together. There's just the four of them.
Actually, how long were you working on this book?
Um, I think I wrote this in a year.
Okay.
Yeah, it was like a year. I probably could have written it faster, but a lot of it was concentrated energy and
Mm.
time and focus, and then long periods of not writing at all. And in other periods, there was just like research.
Well, while we're on your process, I mean, you had some amazing interviews. Can you talk to us a little bit about the interviews that you did for the book?
Yeah, I interviewed musicians that like session musicians that had played with Boyz II Men. Um, I interviewed a woman who was their studio manager who, gave me a lot of the insights into how they built their own recording studio right outside of Philly. But also, I interviewed musicians. A friend of mine named Iman Williams, who's a brilliant singer, but also, grew up as a kid like a crazy Boyz II Men fan. So I interviewed. It was a nice mixture of folks who knew the group and had worked with the group, but then also folks who just came at it from a fan perspective. People who are now working in music, but were influenced by Boyz II Men.
Mm. Now, the archivist and curator in me has to ask, did you record all of these interviews and are they going to live anywhere, or did you just kind of use what you needed for the book and then get rid of them?
Oh no, I record everything.
Okay. So,
um, so yeah, I kept every single interview. But I do that in my day to day practice as a music journalist. Like I don't throw out anything.
so you just maintain your own archive there.
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely. I'm trying to come up with something specifically focused on early Philly hip hop history, like an
Mm.
interview archive. I've been interviewing folks who were active in hip hop culture in the period before rap records existed.
Mm.
So, the hip hop culture has a birth date, which is problematic, but because culture is not born on one day. But the summer of 1973, DJ Kool Herc throws his first party in the Bronx, which kind of initiates hip hop as a cultural movement. And then in the fall of 1979, Sugar Hill Gang releases Rapper's Delight. That's a 6 year gulf where this music, if you wanted to hear it, you had to go to a party. Like you had to be live, or someone had to record a cassette tape of a party. You couldn't go in a record store and buy rap records because they didn't exist. So I've been finding folks in Philly, but also some folks in New York who were active in that time period, which is like grossly underdocumented.
Mm.
If you look at most accounts of early hip hop history, they kind of jump from 73 to 79.
Mm.
So I've been doing a lot of research and interviews and gathering stories in that Gulf period. People telling me about, parties, designing flyers, building sound systems, like the big outdoor mobile sound systems, like people breaking down like how that technology was built, and just trying to fill in that gap period. So, long story short, I'm building up an archive, or I already have an archive of interviews, but I've been like really focusing on that stuff, and hopefully it'll live somewhere publicly where we can kind of fill in those gaps, so like early hip hop uh,
I know. I think you
history.
need a museum and archive that's open to researchers and the public.
Yeah, and funds,
Yeah, yeah, that's oof, that's the tricky part. You just
resources.
mentioned like the medium via which people would interact with music, and at first, you had to be at these house parties, and then let's talk about how people engaged with Boyz II Men's music. How do you think their careers may or may not have been different if they debuted in today's streaming-driven landscape?
Yeah. I don't know. It's
maybe it wouldn't have made a difference. I don't know.
Yeah, I definitely don't think that they would have been as big. I think that uh, for as diverse as culture was then, uh, pop culture and pop music in particular now is diverse but also fractured. Like there's no real even semblance of a monoculture where somebody can take over and dominate like Boyz II Men did. You know, so I don't know. It's so fractured now, um, and the streaming model financially is so exploitative to musicians. I don't know if they could have survived in this. Like maybe through like TikTok, like like social media with like
Yeah.
the spectacle that would have been associated with the harmonies and them, being like supreme vocal talents like they were. But the record industry infrastructure that existed when Boyz II Men debuted does not exist now. It's kind of like a shell of what it used to be. So I don't know if any. We don't even have R&B groups right now. You know what I mean? Like there, there are no popular R&B groups. Maybe if you consider K-pop R&B, which it kind of is. You know what I mean? Like the influence that it takes from R&B. But as far as like Black American R&B groups, name one that's popular right now. It doesn't exist. So I don't know. I can't really speculate on that, but it would be difficult for them right now if they debut, today.
One of the authors I interviewed this year was Alan Light. He had a book out about the enduring legacy of Fleetwood Mac's Rumors. And he was talking about how it's still so popular. It's constantly, one of the most streamed albums, and teenagers are listening to it. Do we
Sure.
see anything similar with Boys to Men? I mean, or let me rephrase that. Do younger listeners engage with Boys to Men today?
Yeah, I think that so there's kind of like a trend of R&B dance parties now.
Hmm.
So young people will go to a club and a DJ will just play 90s and early 2000s R&B for the entire night. And that's kind of like a trend now. And Boyz II Men is absolutely getting played, in those places. As a DJ, sometimes I DJ for people much younger than me. You could play Motownphilly anywhere, and people get excited. So it's definitely nothing along the lines of rumors. I know a lot of DJs who sell records, and they always tell me that rumors is still like like people always ask DJs and record dealers for copies of rumors. So I don't think Boyz II Men has anything like that. But their music is still sticking around. Like as young people are still rediscovering this stuff because it has a level of intimacy, passion, but also musicality
Mm.
that I think it's harder to get out of pop music now. Pop music is kind of uh, flattened itself out emotionally and musically in a lot of ways. So it's I think that young people, the reason why young people are so infatuated with older music is because there's there's like a richness and a passion that people were pouring into these records that maybe they're not getting out of the music that's popular now.
Well, let me pause my questions there because I don't know where the time goes. We're almost out of time already.
Oh yeah,
To
okay.
our audience, you can unmute yourself and ask a question, or you can type it in the chat and I'm happy to read it for you. So think about unmuting, think about typing your question in the chat while I ask John one more myself while you're forming your thoughts there. Uh, John, you've been doing this work, like you said, since the 90s. Okay, you didn't have the book contract, but you've been immersed in this scene and writing about these scenes since the 90s.
Yeah.
And yet, did you find out things during writing this book that surprised you?
Oh yeah, so many things. So I knew that Boyz II Men had their own recording studio outside of Philly, but what I didn't know was that the building where they built that studio was an old building that used to be a Civil War munitions manufacturer. So like they would make like the bullets that the Union used in the Civil War back in the day, but also very young pre-fame Britney Spears recorded an entire album, like an unreleased album, in Boyz II Men studio. So it's just like a bunch of like little like and a well-known Philly soul singer named Vivian Green co-wrote the songs for Britney back in the day. She was like a kid, you know what I mean? Like trying to get a record deal. It's kind of like her demo album that she made at Boyz II Men studio. So it was just like little stuff like that. Like Boyz II Men is a group. Like I said, I grew up on their music. I knew a bunch about their music walking into this process, but I learned a lot too. Like little like tidbits like that.
Here's a question in the chat, and this might be hard. This is probably like trying to pick your favorite child. Do you have a favorite Boys to Men song
Oh
and
yeah,
why?
for sure, absolutely.
Oh, you didn't even like.
Yeah, no. Motown Philly. So okay, so the DJ part of me, Motown Philly is my favorite song because it works anywhere you play it. But maybe my favorite song personally is "Please Don't Go." So I talk about this in the book. There's a video, black and white video, where Boyz II Men, like right after they released their first record, they go back to Kappa, their high school, and it's a bunch of kids, like they're in their old choir room, but a bunch of kids who go there now, teenagers, they're all gathered around the group at the piano, and Nate, who wrote "Please Don't Go," he sits down at the piano and he plays the most beautiful version of this song. And I don't know, it's something about it, but I loved it when I was a kid when it came out. It's just, it's a gorgeous, tender, uh, like yearning song, love song. You know what I mean? It's just, it's absolutely beautiful. Like they have a lot of songs that are gorgeous songs that make you cry, make you feel something. But "Please Don't Go" might be the one for me above all of them.
Remember, if you're here on the Zoom, you can unmute yourself and shout out. Oh, I see Paul has unmuted. Paul, you want to ask a question?
Yeah, thanks for putting this together, Melissa. John, good evening. I have two questions for you, my
Mm-hmm.
friend. On the Boys to Men tip, was Philly the first breakout market, or was there another market that fell in love with them first?
Yeah. So, from what I've seen in like the radio archives, like looking through that stuff, I spent a lot of time in the radio archives, but also like the newspaper clippings, just trying to get an idea of how this group spread so quickly. I don't think that Philly uh, broke Boys to Men in a significant way above like New York or L.A. or whatever. It from what I've seen, uh, their label dropped uh, Motown Philly, and it just like it caught on like wildfire. Philly may have been, you know, slightly ahead of other markets, but it wasn't like this group didn't have um, say like an incubation period
Like a
in
hometown vibe
Philadelphia.
that kind of grew up in that
Yeah,
area.
right, right. It wasn't that. Even like later, you know, with like Philly soul singers like Jill Scott, who was making the rounds. You know, these guys made the rounds too, but a lot of their early success was, you know, a major label backing them, a super producer working with them on that first cut, Dallas Austin, and they, you know, the label put it out and it just it blew up like crazy.
And my second question is a Philly question.
Hmm.
Um, I appreciate your art in covering the Philadelphia market. decades of music going on in that area. I've explored Philly a little on the music side. Your thoughts and Sigma Sound Studios. How come nobody's gotten behind that to use that as a center point to highlight or showcase the Philly sound over the last, I don't know, 6 decades?
Yeah.
And I'm just looking for your opinion on that.
Yeah, for sure. So there is there has been a movement to preserve and recapture uh, Sigma as a space, and maybe open it as there's been ideas floating around, for folks who want to open it as like a museum,
Right.
right? So I literally, it's funny you said this. I literally just rode past Sigma last night, and every time I pass it, I think about it like, yo, this city, we struggle with prioritizing our history. You know what I mean? I honestly feel like the city has no real care or desire to fund something like that. They would
I get the history in that studio on that corner.
yeah. It don't make any sense because like you know not far from Sigma, the Trocadero. Famous live music venue where everybody's played. It used to be like an opera house in the 1800s. The Trocadero is closed. You know what I mean? So I think that this city, specifically, um, our city council and our mayor have made a choice that development is primary. You know, these rich real estate investors and speculators, their interests are primary, and music and history and culture are just not. So that's what's happening with Sigma. But there are people, musicians, record collectors, journalists who have been pushing to try to get the Sigma building,
Right.
but obviously it hasn't happened yet.
Right. Appreciate it. Thank you, John.
Yeah, Paul, thank you.
Thanks for your questions, Paul.
Alyssa.
So, in our last few minutes here, John, every author has a publisher and an editor to whom they must answer, and inevitably stuff has to get cut, right? Were there any stories that got cut that you wish could have been included?
Yeah, so not so much from my editor or the publisher, but there was a story that I couldn't fully verify in the way that I wanted to, that I had to cut, and it's absolutely crazy. So Boyz II Men, they've talked about this. So one year, uh, they sold out Madison Square Garden, right? The year after they sold out Madison Square Garden, they might have done 2 nights at the Garden. I can't remember, but the next year they were performing at a dive bar in Pennsylvania, singing "End of the Road" next to like a mechanical bull, a half full dive bar. So, or I would say dive bar, a half full neighborhood bar. To go from those heights and then a year later, you know, singing at this small bar, uh, and I wanted to include that story just to take us on the journey of where they were, where they ended up. Um, but I couldn't fully verify the date, and I think I did find the town that the bar was in, but I couldn't fully verify the date. So
Mm-mm.
I decided to leave it out because I wanted this to be detailed. I wanted us to, I didn't want to say, oh, and then that one time, and not
Mm.
have like the context of when this actually happened. But an interesting part about that, you would think them telling the story, it would be like, oh man, this is crazy. Like we just sold out the Garden last year, and now this is terrible. Like we're performing at this bar, but their attitude was like, okay, this is the gig that we got now. You know what I mean? Like and I think that love of music that we
Mm.
talked about earlier, and them being able to sing together the way that they could, I think that helped take them through a lot of different trials and kept them dedicated to the music and the music business. Because a lot of people, you know, if they played in a band that was like the biggest band in the world, and then somebody tried to book them at a neighborhood bar a year later, they probably quit the music business, go be a lawyer or something. You know what I mean? Like the fact that they stuck to it, and now on the back end are kind of receiving the rewards of sticking to it. They have the their Vegas residency, which is big, that sort of thing. I think it's a testament to how much they love singing together, how much they love music.
Well, our hour has flown by here. I want to leave the ball in your court, John. Any last thoughts? Anything we have not covered that you would have liked to?
No, no, I think I'm good.
Awesome. Well, I'm so glad that you could join us so that we could shine some light on this enormously successful and yet, somehow underappreciated group. So, anyone who's listening tonight, anyone who is streaming this later, you want to make sure that you go and grab your copy of John Morrison's Boyz II Men 40th anniversary celebration. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you, John. I hope everybody has a wonderful end to 2025. Have a good night.
Good night, y'all. Thank you.